You know, I often feel like a teacher sometimes making these videos, but I know I'm not a teacher. I'd actually make a really good teacher. The only problem is that our institutions of higher learning, I'm sorry, I always have to laugh when I say higher learning, are completely corrupt. What would happen is, if I got hired as a teacher, I'd be fired within the first week for being too brutally honest. Not for using harsh language amongst the students, but just for being too brutally honest, because people don't like to hear the truth. And that, of course, is how you know, one of the many countless reasons how you know that we live in a utterly corrupt and defunct age, and that George Orwell was completely correct. Everything is upside down and backwards, like the greatest crime that we could actually commit nowadays is to speak the truth. Thanks to me, these 3 books are available for download. Someone will probably put some links to them below. Here's a couple of them. I'll talk about those in a second. And there's a great one. I got a couple copies of this book, but I always refer to the one of mine that's falling apart because it's highlighted. It's Causality, Electromagnetic Induction, and Gravitation. He had 2 PhDs. I wish he was still alive. That's Dr. Oleg Djefimenko. In understanding natura naturans, or what we call Mother Nature, it must be stated that if the picture or image thereof, in speaking about nature, is not divinely simplex, it may not be simple, but it must be divinely simplex, then it must be rejected, because it must be divinely simplex, because nature doesn't deal in complexities. Everything is pressure mediation. The conjugate geometry of the entire universe is the toroid and the hyperboloid. You'll not read that anywhere else. Many people postulated that the universe is toroidal. I mean, that's existed now for probably nearly 100 years, but I'm at least the first person who was able to figure out that the conjugate geometry is the toroid and the hyperboloid. The hyperboloid is an hourglass shape, and these are respectively the geometries of force and motion, inertia and acceleration. Just like an hourglass, I wish I had an hourglass here. I got an hourglass somewhere. The center of which we actually have 0 space and 0 time. This is the plane of inertia. This is the nexus of counter space, which has no Cartesian value. And space is not a thing. Someone was asking today, said they were trying to differentiate out time and measure. It's like, well, time and measure are one and the same thing. Time is not a thing itself. Time is only a measure of magnitudes and their passing. Interestingly enough, when we have the point source field of magnetism, and magnetism, of course, is the toroidal geometry of force and motion, i.e. centrifugal divergence. Imagine what a 3-dimensional force vector looks like. Okay, imagine nothing in the universe, and this is, of course, a thought experiment. A force vector cannot be 2-dimensional. When we think of polarization, we think conventionally of how we were taught in school, that polarization, we have a north pole and a south pole on either end of the magnet. But of course a magnet has mass and volume. It has a Cartesian footprint in our universe of mass and magnitude. By the way, every ancient culture said time was the number 4. Every ancient culture, both Greek and Indian, and the only number that doesn't exist in the first 5 numbers of the Fibonacci sequence is the number 4. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Let's do that again. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. The agathon, the euristos dias, magnitude and matter, and the 5th would be ontos, or the consubstantiality of matter and spirit. And that is metaphysics at its most fundamental. But let's take a look, and also like to talk about biological experimentation. We have here the plane of inertia. Here's, of course, it's represented on a two-dimensional chalkboard here. But imagine a piece of wire bent like an S, and you take both ends and you bend them inverse to one another. What actually happens in a point source massive field, if I had a magnet here, is that the geomagnetic procession sets up lag. And we're talking about geomagnetic procession. We're actually talking about extrapolating the interior geometry towards the exterior geometry of a torus or a donut. And that lag of that stress or torsion, because all force creates stress and torsion, either of itself or of its surrounding nature or inhabitants. It must set up stress and torsion and lag, and that stress or torsion and lag is called the Lamour frequency or geomagnetic procession, and it will always find a balance, and it will find a balance at the most fundamental harmony of nature. And this is the reason why, by the way, I don't know if you've ever seen them, I've done a lot of videos on seed experimentation, where you get radically different results. There have been hundreds of people, literally, that either did or didn't believe me. It's like, you know, this is be easy enough to test. I grow stuff. I'm going to do magnetic seed exposure experiments to the stuff that I grow. And everyone can, oh my God, this works. Oh my God, I can't believe this works. Oh my God. Hundreds and hundreds of people. So what you actually have, due to the torque and the lag, is that you will actually, kind of like when you squeeze a water balloon, yeah, it'll actually squish out to the side. And usually there's a much larger, if you actually take a perfectly spherical water balloon, and no matter how you grasp it, if you squeeze it in the middle, the one side will be substantially larger than the other. Not this is kind of a visual analogy. I don't know if you've ever squeezed a water balloon. But you'll actually end up with, on the case of the geomagnetic procession, or Lamour frequency, you'll end up with a phase disparity of a ratio of 1 to 5. And it's exactly the same thing what happens if you take the midpoint of an egg. Eggs are all kind of different. We take like a perfect chicken egg, and by perfect I mean it's perfectly shaped, because I've seen chicken eggs that are almost spherical. But if you take the perfect, ideal, stereotypical chicken egg and you cut it, dissect it in half, you'll actually end up with a volume disparity of 1 to 5, which is 1 over 1.6. Down here would be 1.618033, so on and so forth. So you end up with this temporal lag, yeah, due to the torsion disparity, this geomagnetic procession. And this is necessitated from the three-dimensional force vector that extrapolates out the toroidal geometry that is, of course, found on any and all magnet. And, man, I could spend so many thousands of hours talking about the fundamental principle of force in Mother Nature, i.e. magnetism. Of course, when you ask somebody to define a magnet, they can't tell you what it is. It's like, well, what defines a magnet? It's obviously qualitative, not quantitative. Before a magnet becomes a magnet, it's quantitatively identical. So what's the quality which actually defines it? It's a point source object. And that point source object has lag. And, of course, magnets drive every computer. Would be impossible. iPads, iPhones, cameras, laptops. It would be impossible without magnets in them. Anyway, these are the books. This one is not so great as far as learning about what's going on. It's a Magnetic Blueprint of Life by Rolls and Davis. You could find this online. Just do a search. Someone would probably leave a comment in the giving a link to it in the comments below. This is the best one to get. The other one, Magnetism in Living System, that was a suppressed book actually. That's why that book is so incredibly hard to find. This is Magnetism's Effects on living systems. They discovered by accident, due to worm experiments inside like cardboard containers. And then I don't believe in experimenting on animals for various ethical reasons, which should be blatantly obvious. Anyway, you can see where I have it highlighted here. I got a lot of this book highlighted. I've read it a few times. They placed a bunch of earthworms near a magnetic field. And the next morning they found out the earthworms went crazy and they chewed their way out and they died on the table due to dehydration. And they did it again, same thing. Earthworms didn't like it. They changed the field around. The earthworms were, you know, shucking and grooving and they're happy and eating and making babies. And on the other field, if they put them in a container where they couldn't chew their way out, they wasted away to nothing and they were very lethargic. Then they experimented on chicken embryos, which I don't suggest because it's unethical. Anyway, they experimented on a lot of different critters. But the seed experiment, they'd have a patent for seed exposure. However, it was very weak, and their magnets in their days were very weak, ferrite magnets. But they still got strong results, but you could get a lot better results during the germination process. Literally, and I told people, it only takes 6 to 7 minutes of a seed exposure, just seeds only, on a polarized side of the centrifugal edge of a magnetic field. You'll get drastic. Remember the old story we grew up with, Jack and the Beanstalk? magic beans, magic seeds. This is literally, now I thought about actually going into business selling magnetically exposed seeds, but some wackadoodle out there would end up suing you to death, saying that, they end up getting cancer because of genetically altered seeds, and you'd be put out of business overnight. So that would be a serious problem because people are so sue crazy, of course. But it works. I tell people, just to try this on their own. Like I said, hundreds and hundreds, literally. And I have at least 30 videos showing this, the various steps, radical results. I do alfalfa sprouts, and oh man, like the North Pole exposed seeds, they grow weak and puny, and there's a lot of dead seeds. They smell awful, they're watery, they taste awful. The South Pole exposed seeds, they grow hardy and fast. They have this enormous growth spurt. They slow down a little bit. This is the reason for this is that water is a polar molecule. I actually have the geometry of water, which is also, too, the Pythagorean triangle, which in triplicate, superimposed over itself, makes up the Pythagorean pentagram. Anyway, this is the geometry of water, which is a polar molecule. It's not my opinion, that's a fact. So, and last I recall, all life requires water. So, this is also, too, how birds navigate. They don't navigate via magnetism directly, rather indirectly, due to the phase disparity of a magnetic field. Hello, the Earth's magnetosphere. You actually see a phase shift, and this is my discovery, by the way. Phase shift, either red shifted or blue shifted on the magnet underneath the supercell. And it all gets down to this. And of course, like I said, this is two-dimensional. This is a three-dimensional S-curve represented in 2D of a fundamental force vector. And you actually overlay this 1,000 times over. It will actually paint out or extrapolate the toroidal geometry that makes up magnetism. It's the same thing with this little tangerine here. If I were to peel it, you would see that the tangerine inside is toroidal. We'd actually have the plane of inertia right here. This tangerine is exactly like the magnetic field. This is what confuses people, okay? Just like this tangerine, okay? Let's say this tangerine is a magnet and a magnet is this tangerine. Just follow with me for just a second here. Everybody that loves tangerines, okay, they peel them, they love how tasty they are, and they pull the segments apart. And of course the sections of the toroid which make up the tangerine, i.e. the magnetic field. This is all people care about. No one is ever on Earth, just think about this for a second, okay? No one, and this is a teaching tool for children. This is what you should show children, this part of my video. Not saying my video is for children. Which they're not. I don't label them that way. So, no one has ever commented on a tangerine, ever, okay, because it's toroidal geometry, okay, just follow me with the analogy, about the empty hole that exists on either side of this tangerine, or the empty little space that exists at the center of this. Nobody on Earth has ever done that. Maybe one person, when they were drunk, might have commented. I see this little empty navel right here. Same thing with the navel orange, right? And of course, this is a toroid, yeah? So this is all people are interested in. This is all they ever comment on. The tangerine, how tasty it is. No one's ever commented really about being fascinated by, because you can't eat nothingness, right? This is the same thing with magnetism. Well, what's a magnet? Well, it's a magnetic field around it. So, well, is that what defines the magnet? Well, sure it is, because that's what a magnet is, magnetic field. Let's actually use this little tangerine as a perfect analogy for that magnet. That's all people see. They see the puppet, but they might see the strings, but they can't see pulling the strings on the string puppet. The actual growth from nothing, the counterspatial nexus of this little tangerine, where nothing is here in the center. Yeah. No one seems to realize that that's the source for everything. The counterspatial energy, release of energy from which the actual sections of the tangerine that make up the toroid grew from. No one can eat the empty hole, that is on either side of this toroid of the tangerine. But the same is true applied analogously to the magnet. People only know of and understand the magnetic field that is around a magnet, but they don't understand this hyperboloidal, which is hourglass shaped. Yeah. If you're actually to draw a perfect sphere around this, you would actually have a bubble up here and a bubble below, and decreasing point to counter space, just like an hourglass shape, where space and time vanish. Time is only a measure, and space has no properties. There's no such notion as bending space and time. This is the only time Nikola Tesla lost his mind and nearly foamed at the mouth, was the notion that space had properties which could be bent, a la relativity, a la Einstein. He said this was ludicrous, this was harebrained insanity, and of course Nikola Tesla was right. And if you think you're smarter than Nikola Tesla, then you might have a defect, a la your personality. But the only thing that would ever, and as Eric Dollard said, this is a direct quote from Eric Dollard, you can never understand electricity without understanding counter space. He said it's absolutely impossible. I'm a big fan of his books, even though he has a lot of personality quirks, and I personally don't like him at all. But being a person of wisdom and intellect, I can separate out this strange individual that, basically hates everybody and everything, which he does. No offense. And say, I still recommend his books. Smart individual, very intelligent person. Recommend. I made him quite a bit of money recommending a lot of people buy his books, which are available online. But I mean, personally, I don't really respect the guy on a personal level at all. I would never want to spend more than 5 minutes in his company, which I actually have done. And but that's off topic. It's this is about separating out what someone says versus what they are and their intellect. But he's correct. You can never understand electricity without understanding counter space. You can never understand a magnet, which people only understand its magnetic field, without understanding what gives rise to the magnetic field. That's the plane of inertia, or the counterspatial nexus of true inertia, the original definition of inertia, not our current connotation of the term inertia. Magnetism is toroidal because it is always tied to the plane of inertia. The reason why the force vector of magnetism is three-dimensional is because it follows, just like a dog that has a chain around its neck that's staked to the ground, it must follow and be tied to that, because that's all magnetism is. Magnetism is the release of energy of the dielectric, which manifests as the magnetic field. Magnetism is the dielectric field. That's like saying ice is the water field, or saying steam is the water field. Ice, water, and steam are all one thing, are they not? Yes, they are. Humans love to pigeonhole things. So what we should technically, if we were a more advanced species of human beings, some sort of advanced creature, that is evolved intellectually far, far beyond, instead of calling it magnetism, we should call it and this is really long, like the dielectric field, but not the dielectric field, something more elaborate, which no one would ever say. We just say magnetism. The dielectric field in manifesting loss, yeah? In manifesting loss, the dielectric field. In other words, when the dielectric loses energy, it manifests through this three-dimensional force vector, which we call magnetism, or the toroidal magnetic field, which has phase disparity, which has lag. This is called EMR, by the way. And it follows a Lamour frequency of disparity between the North Pole and the South Pole at a ratio of 1 to 5. And since water is a polar, you take a polarized field, i.e. magnet, and you apply it to growth, i.e. life, whether it be seeds or worms or whatever, even though I don't believe in ethically experimenting on any living critters. When you take a polarized field like magnetism and you apply it to the world's basis of life, the entire universe's basis of life, which is water, which is a polar molecule. Polarized field, polarized molecule, water. Then you end up with something magical. I'm the only person on YouTube who's been talking about this. I've had hundreds, I had to say this again, hundreds of people that either did or didn't believe me or said, I'd like to try this out. I grow stuff. I got a lot of seeds. I'm going to do this. I'm going to order some magnets. I'm going to follow what this guy told me to do. And they do. And they all say the same thing. Wow. Why wasn't I taught this in school? Wow. Why isn't anybody talking about this? Wow. Because it's true. It's not hokum. It's not nonsense. It's not like, fringe science. I love it when people say fringe. You're not widely accepted. It's something that's a fact. Everything that we hold dear today, which actually is true, was at some point fringe. Yeah, like It's just like this tangerine. It's kind of a near perfect analogy. Is it? None of us considers the empty space or hole that makes up either side of the pole of this tangerine, nor do we consider its plane of inertia, nor do we consider this empty spot, this void in the middle, where the entire toroid sprang from, in the case this tangerine grew from. But that is the most important part of the magnet. The part that no one sees, the part that no one realizes, the part that no one talks about. That plane of inertia is the reason why the most diamagnetic element in the universe, bismuth, diamagnetic means hates magnetism. Yeah, but if you have a large enough magnet like this monster magnet that I'm looking at down here below on the floor, bismuth is actually attracted to the center of that magnet. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's diamagnetic. How could it be attracted to it? It's not attracted, it's dielectric acceleration. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Well, it's because you could see this demonstrably. Nobody really has a giant $1,000 monster magnet. Almost nobody does. But yeah, it is repelled against a magnetic field. But the magnetic field around any and all magnets, all of them, only exists around that centrifugal edge, which would be right here. Like this edge of the toroid, where actually the toroidal field is expanding and, of course, contracting again. These are actually expanding, contracting loops. They're not like lines. Lines doesn't mean anything. There's no such thing as a line of force. Line is a conceptual abstraction. But the bismuth, just like any magnet, actually accelerates right here. So if you have a large enough magnet, most magnets are not that large. Most magnets are not even this large, much less a giant monster magnet. That ball or sphere or whatever it is of bismuth will accelerate. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Bismuth is diamagnetic. Yeah, but a magnet is not purely magnetism at all. It's ridiculous. That's like thinking one of those little puppets is merely the little piece of wooden puppet. It's like, no, there's the strings and there's the hand yanking the strings on the puppet. Everybody is like a child when they see a puppet show, which nobody does anymore. They only see the puppet. They don't see the strings, and they don't see the hand up above, which you can't see in the case of a puppet show that's pulling the strings. Well, magnetism is the puppet. The strings and the hand, which are the driving force of the little friggin' puppet, yeah, that is right here. Yeah, people only see this. Well, that's the magnetism. You're right. But the most important part is right here and right here and right here. Did I make that simple enough in the analogy? I think I did. Anyway, I recommend downloading those books. I'd like to get deeper into this book, but this book is very heavy intellectually, and I have to talk about some abstruse concepts in this. Maybe I will in another video. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. I hope it cleared up some of the things and about magnetism and using some simple analogies, especially a tangerine. Yeah, pretty good analogy using a tangerine, right? Anyway, I hope you like this video. If you do, any donation is always welcome because I don't sell anything. And I spend a lot of time answering emails and phone calls, and any assistance is always greatly appreciated. If not, you tell me to take a long run off of a short pier. Whatever makes you happy. You should never eat on a video. Sorry about that.